Ease, we're all about calculating the best high for you. Ran out of shows to watch for the second time this week? Order an indica pre-roll. Social distance park hang? Pair that awkward picnic with a vaporizer. See, we're like your weed guy, but 420% nerdier. So just worry about when you're going to take that edible and let us do the rest. Ease, highly calculated cannabis delivery. Get 30% off your first order with promo code NERD at ease.com. That's EAZE.com.
Hey, what's up? This is Matt Barnes, and I'm here to talk to you about weed. As an NBA champ and analyst, I guess you can say I'm an expert in that space. And Ease is the cannabis version of me, and they have you covered with the best delivery service in the game. Seeing the in-laws for dinner? That's a low-dose sativa gummy. Can't stand another Zoom meeting? They're sending in some top-shelf THC beverages. So what are you waiting for? Get up to 30% off your first order with promo code MATT. That's MATT at ease.com. Ease, a highly calculated cannabis delivery service.
What is up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining me for the first ever episode of Life is a Mosh Pit. Those of you who know me know that I have another podcast that I host and that I created called The Jeffrey Epstein Show. Over there, we follow the Jeffrey Epstein case down to the very last detail, on a daily basis, by the way. None of that nonsense beating around the bush that you get from the clowns in the legacy media. We get down to it, folks. Cut out all the nonsense, trim the fat, and get right down to the meat on the bone. And I've been at that now since October of 2019 at a steady clip. Every day, at least one episode following the case as it unfolds in the news. I offer up my opinion, my commentary, and we discuss all of the finer points that might have been missed by the legacy media, either on purpose or just because they're a bunch of blundering fools. It's probably a mixture of both. But we have just broken the 2 million download barrier over there, and that is all with iTunes shadow banning us, not having us in the directory, a couple of the other platforms playing the same games. And still, even with those roadblocks, we have found a way to crush the 2 million download barrier. And we're going strong still, every single day over there. To those of you who have followed me from that podcast to this one, y'all know what time it is. You already know. We're going to get down to it. We're going to bite down on our mouthpiece, take the center of the ring, and start throwing shots. There's a lot of stuff that is left out of the news cycle on a regular basis. Stuff that is impactful to all of our lives. And for me, here with this podcast, Life is a Mosh Pit, those are the halls that we're going to travel. We're going to talk about the things that I feel are impactful to everyday life of the common man. You know, all of us, besides the handful of billionaires that are making moves behind the scenes. You know, the 2,700 people that are really making the moves, that are really calling the shots. The whole entire news cycle is tailored to them, basically. So we're going to try and cut through all of that BS. And I'm going to pick out an article each day, at least one article each day, and we're going to discuss it here on the podcast. And then hopefully, if it resonates with you folks, you'll shoot me some emails. You'll find me on social media. You can do that at Twitter, by the way, at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. And we can discuss the topics at hand. And you can throw me some ideas of some of the stories that you think are being buried, that you want me to dive into and take a look at. Offer up my opinion. Because let's be very clear from the jump of this podcast. Just like with the Jeffrey Epstein show, I am not a journalist. I'm just a regular, average guy who has a very eclectic palate when it comes to the things he's interested in. And sometimes I might have a couple of big opinions. So we're going to delve into a lot of those kinds of topics that I feel like are being buried. And one of the topics that is something that really hits close to home to me and something that has really affected my life, and I'm sure it has affected a lot of your lives out there as well. And I'm talking about the longest running war in the history of America. Now, I know a lot of people will think right away, oh, the war on terror. Good guess, right? It's been going on for quite some time, since 2001 at least. But that's not the war I'm talking about. I'm talking about the war that was initiated by Nixon. I'm talking about the war that is responsible for a majority of the broken homes in America. I'm talking about a war that, if you want to talk about systemic racism, you would start here. And that war, my friends, is the failed war on drugs. On this podcast, I'm going to have these daily news drops, right? Like we're doing tonight. But we're also going to have seasons. Now, the first season, air quotes, is going to be about the war on drugs. For those of you who listen to the Jeffrey Epstein show, you already know. I've been running my fat yap about this for quite some time. Now, most of you out there have a friend, a relative, a loved one who has been caught up in the war on drugs, either as a participant, somebody getting down, getting high, maybe overdosed, somebody on the other side of the block whipping shit up in the Pyrex. No matter what it is, though, I'm pretty sure most of us have been affected by this one way or the other. And the way the government has went about trying to deal with it has compounded the problem at every single turn. And instead of talking about nonsensical totems such as border walls, which are useful in some regard, right? But to talk about things like that as it's the be-all, end-all, without addressing the other issues, is absolutely ridiculous. And those are the kind of narratives that you see running in the legacy media. Oh, the wall. Oh, this. Oh, the very basic, just scratch the surface kinds of issues that really don't even begin to tell the story. Like, if we're going to talk about the war on drugs, for instance, as Americans, we can't sit around here and talk like we're not at fault here. We're the highest country in the world, folks. Everybody's getting down in America. And then to run around and act like it's a uniquely Mexican problem or a South American problem when we're the ones here in America driving the want, driving the market by consuming. How can we sit here and look down our noses at our neighbors to the south? Could they do a better job? Hell yeah, they could. But I'm not in the business of popping my head over my wall in my backyard, meaning my country, when it's a mess, and telling my neighbor he needs to trim his trees. Clean up your own shit before you're yelling and screaming and demanding things from others. And a lot of people in America, a lot of voters who only see the issue as a black and white issue perhaps, they fall into that category, right? Oh, build the wall, that's going to fix everything. No, that's not going to fix everything. And we need to have a more nuanced approach. We need to have real, sometimes difficult decisions. We might be uncomfortable having these decisions. Our worldview might get shook. But until you become comfortable being uncomfortable, you're going to be hard-pressed to ever expand, to ever really grow intellectually. You got to get out of the box. You have to leave the echo chamber. And that's what I hope to do here when we talk about these kinds of issues. Get off of the mainstream narratives. Get down to it. And talk about things that you can all relate to. Because I know most of you out there have had a relative who has fallen to the clutches of drugs, OD'd, went to jail, maybe robbed your mom and dad. But we have all had our experiences with this war on drugs. And one thing that I am certain of, folks, more certain than anything I have ever been certain of, is that prohibition and throwing people in jail without any chance of rehabilitation or fixing the actual issues at hand is not the right way to go. It's a failed process. We need to do better. We need to find a different way. And there are places that have shown us a proper roadmap to get where we're going. Take a look at Portugal. Since they've decriminalized drugs, take a look at how crime has plummeted. Take a look how the situation has become a lot better. And right here in America itself, all we have to do is go to look back at the times of Prohibition and see how the mafia was able to really bloom, how they were able to piggyback on the black market and make a fortune doing it. All because the government thought that they could legislate morality. Well, you can't. If people want to get high, if people want to get drunk, they're going to do it. And it doesn't matter how many laws you put on the books, they're going to do it. So the idea is to find that happy medium. Look, I don't want people running around in a drug-induced stupor. I don't want people being the walking dead on the streets where my family's walking. Nobody wants that. So instead of having these for-profit prison complex systems that we have, how about we pump that money into rehabilitation and we decriminalize drugs? Let's start there. I won't even go full Monty with my full-on legalization of everything where I really stand, because that's where I'm really at, honestly. But I'm willing to get there in starts, okay? And if we start with decriminalization and we stop making a mockery of all of this and we stop profiting from people's suffering, our fellow citizens, then we're taking a step in the right direction. But if you think all of these drugs got to America on their own, what do you think? The Crips and the Bloods, Freeway Rick Ross, all these cats, they had planes? They were the ones bringing these drugs in here, huh? They weren't. You can thank people like the CIA for that. And when we dive in with the exploration, the series that I'm going to be releasing, we're going to go right from the very beginning, from Nixon starting the war on drugs to right now. It's going to be a weekly series. Going to release every Saturday, starting this Saturday with episode 1. And we're going to dive right into all of it. Get to the very, very, very bottom of it all. Because I'll tell you what, it's a failed process. The policy has failed, and the consequences have reverberated around the world. And that's not hyperbole. That's not me going out on a limb or being a little loose with the truth. You have Mexican drug dealers that are using people from China as money launderers. You have the Italian mafia in Italy itself working hand in hand with people like the Sinaloa Cartel to move weight into Europe. Nobody talks about it. Up until recently, nobody ever even touched the subject. Oh, that there's a connection there. But there is. And there is a whole lot of things like that that have gone unnoticed, that have gone unreported. So I'm going to try and do my best to, at the very least, give you an overview of everything as far as the war on drugs goes, from my perspective anyway. Because there's one thing that I am certain of, folks. And as I just said a second ago, I am not as certain of anything as I am of this. And that is, the war on drugs is an absolute failure. So I believe that with more publicity to that point, and I think with more people jumping on board and truly understanding what is really going on here, that maybe the bought and paid for scumbag politicians that we send to Washington, D.C. will wise up and realize that they are absolutely decimating segments of our population with these laws. And let me tell you what, the number one community that has been disproportionately affected by all of this has been the African American community, and it's not even a debate, it's not even a question. Like I was saying, do you think the Bloods and Crips were flying this shit into America? You think they had the planes? They were down there? You think Freeway Rick Ross and Tukey and those cats went down to Colombia and set these deals up? Of course that didn't happen. There was a whole nexus, the Mexican trampoline and the rest of it. So we're going to get into all of that, and we're going to try and make heads or tails of it at the very least. Try and put it down to a bit of understanding in the very least for people who might not be hip to what's going on, right? And then from there, like I always say over at the Jeffrey Epstein show, you guys can run with it. And if one thing has bared out over at the Jeffrey Epstein show, the audience is just amazing with the research they do, with their contributions. And I can see the same thing happening here with some of these issues. Digging deeper, going further, sending me more articles, interviews. And we all learn together and grow together, just like over at the Epstein show. When I first started over there, I had no idea what was going on in that case. Not a thing. Over here, when we're talking about some of these subjects, a little bit different. I don't have just an outsider's perspective on the war on drugs. I lived it. I grew up in the inner city. I have so many friends that have been caught up, folks, doing long bids, murdered, killed by the cops, killed by each other. And those are some of the stories I'm going to share with you guys as well. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying, I was running the streets in Compton or anything like that. But growing up in the inner city in Las Vegas, it was a fast-paced life. And it has molded my view on all of this. My view might have been different if I grew up in suburbia. I might have had a whole different view on what's going on when it comes to the war on drugs. But I didn't. I grew up in East Las Vegas, 4 miles from the Strip. So my perspective is skewered by my own life experiences. And as we go through this portion of this podcast, I'm going to, share what I have seen personally with you. I'm going to share a conversation I had with somebody who is or was connected with this kind of life. A source that has sent me an email. And I'm going to have some other folks come on and talk to you from their perspective, a first-hand perspective of people that actually ran in them streets, move like that. Because we don't get enough perspective from people who actually lived it, right? All we get is some journalists, and, again, I'm not trying to disparage people. Everyone has their own life experiences. But some journalists who went to Harvard, who lived in, some ritzy-ass suburb, how does that person really have their finger on the pulse? How do they know? They didn't live that life. So you got to go directly to the source. And that's what I plan on doing. We're going to have some people who live that life come on. They're going to talk about their experiences. And it's going to be on, folks. It's going to be a fun ride. And that's just the first season. I have all kinds of other ideas going. I'm going to do a segment on homelessness and the issue that we're dealing with as a nation. We're going to talk about all kinds of things as the podcast progresses and as we move forward. If you folks have ideas, like I said earlier, please shoot those to me because I am hungry to pump content out on this podcast, on this station, and to share with you all of these different projects that I have cooked up in the back of my mind. But the first things first, and that is the war on drugs. Now, what I do over at the Jeffrey Epstein show is I pick an article and I read that article on air. And as we're reading the article, we break it down and we delve into it a little bit. That's what we're going to do here every single day in the same kind of format, but with all kinds of topics. Now, I thought that to kick it off, the first topic, it would be fitting to kick it off with a story about the war on drugs. A story about some of the biggest dealers, some of the biggest narco traffickers from the 80s, from the 90s, how they're getting out of jail now, and how things can be a bit squirrely moving forward with these dudes hitting the scene once again. And we're going to break this article down. We're going to go through it. I'll give you my opinion on all of it. And again, remember, I'm not a journalist. I'm not some scholar. I'm certainly not an expert, right? I'm just a guy that done some research, has a few opinions on things, and we're going to check out the news from my perspective. So our first article ever, the inaugural article, is from El País, which is a newspaper or publication that is a Mexican publication, and it, deals with all sorts of things. This article is dealing with Mexican drug gangs. The author of this article, Elena Reina. Headline: Prison releases signal the return of Mexico's drug lords from the 1990s. The U.S. has agreed to free rival narc bosses Vicente Zambada and Eduardo Arellano Felix in exchange for insider information about the Mexican underworld. So these dudes getting out of jail, shit's going to get hot again, and I know that sounds a little weird with the giving them information, but it's kind of a common occurrence in narco world. A lot of these guys will rat on their rivals to the authorities to get their rivals wiped out. So it's kind of a weird dynamic as opposed to what we see perhaps in America with some of the, snitches get stitches type shit. Now, of course, snitching down there gets you clipped too. But I'm talking about some of the bigger bosses, the bigger players. They're all in bed with a lot of these politicians, powerful people down in Mexico. There's a lot of overlap, folks, when we're talking about the political structure in Mexico, the military, etc., with these narco traffickers. Big money, right? And when big money's getting spread around, big problems come right on its heels. In the early 1990s, Mexico lived through the bloody rivalry between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Tijuana Cartel in the country's first major narco war. And this all started in the wake of the fracturing of the Gulf Cartel. Now, if you want a basic idea and an overview of some of that, Narcos on Netflix is a good starting point. Get you familiar with some of the basic players and some of the stuff like that. But what you'll want to do is go a bit deeper, right? And I'm going to try and do that as well here on this podcast for this series. We're going to go a little bit deeper and we're going to profile a couple of the major players and stuff like that. But a good starting point, and a great show, by the way, if you're looking to be entertained, is Narcos on Netflix. Definitely something that, if this topic interests you, you should be checking out. The fallout would leave a nation strewn with corpses and lay a path for every other conflict that has come since. Until then, drugs in Mexico had been controlled by a tight group of allied criminal organizations, which split into factions following the arrest of drug boss Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Now, again, that is the topic of Narcos Mexico, is Miguel and his operation within the Federación, the Gulf Federation. And he brought together all of the plazas. The plazas are what they call the areas where the drug bosses, make their moves, run their areas from. So he brought together all of these plazas from all around Mexico, put them together as a federation, as one group, as one narco trafficking group, and worked together to traffic these drugs to America. Now, their biggest commodity, right, is that border for these drug traffickers. 2,000 miles of border to try and pump drugs through. Pretty daunting task for the authorities on the other side to try and rein that in. His nephews would go on to lead the Tijuana Cartel, also known as the Arellano Felix Cartel, while infamous Mexican narco trafficker Ismael El Mayo Zambada led the Sinaloa Cartel. The intense rivalry between these criminal organizations would change Mexico forever. Now, I remember going to Mexico around this time. Now, I started going to Mexico a lot around 1997. That's when I started going to Tijuana quite a bit, 2-3 times a month, to go down there and party with my friends. You know, the drinking age was 18 in Mexico. So living in Las Vegas, we would drive down to San Diego. We'd stay in San Isidro, at the Motel 6 or whatever. And we'd walk over across the border and go get absolutely sloshed, absolutely drunk. And even back then, you could start to see the change. Like when I first started going to Mexico, down to TJ, I was so comfortable and, not worried about stuff like this that I slept on the beach in Rosarito, in Ensenada. We were backpacking around down there like we were in a happy Danish countryside town or something. The last thing we thought about was, getting rolled by the cartel. More worried about getting rolled by the cops, right? The federales. To be honest with you folks, and this is no BS, I've never had one single problem with somebody in a cartel or somebody in that kind of life when I've been in Mexico. Every bit of problems I ever had down there, anytime I've ever gotten shook down or anything like that, was from the federales. So when I was going down there, there really wasn't this hanging presence of violence down there, right? It was a dangerous place, and you wanted to be on your shit, make sure you had your head on a swivel. We call that here, where I'm from, East Side situational awareness. So you wanted to make sure you were on your game, and you weren't, caught lacking. But besides that, it was a good time. I went, I partied, I didn't have any inhibitions, just had a good-ass time. And then, as the years went on and I was getting a little bit older, right around 9/11-ish and a little bit after, there was a different vibe down in TJ. Even at night when you'd go down there to Revolution Boulevard to go party or whatever, the vibe was different. And it started to feel a little bit dangerous. So after 9/11, it just was a situation for me, especially when I would go down to TJ. It was not the same. So I stopped going down there in 2003 or so. And I haven't been back since. Not because of the cartel violence, but it just seemed like a whole changed place. But now you add all of this cartel violence going on, and never mind back then, now it's crazier. Again, we're going to get to that. I don't want to digress too much. But Tijuana is a very dangerous place, an awesome city. Look, I don't want to sit here and talk trash about TJ because honestly, folks, it's one of my favorite cities in the whole world. The vibe of TJ is dope. The people are great. I've had nothing but great experiences there. So when I see these bodies lined up, I see people hanging from bridges, decapitated folk, shop owners getting killed, a sushi restaurant owner getting clipped the other day. It's bothersome. And it irks me to know that we're not really trying to address this problem here in America or elsewhere. This year, the United States will release Vincent Zambada, the firstborn son of El Mayo, along with Eduardo Arlano Felix, one of the 7 siblings who took over took over from their uncle in the rival group. The collaboration agreements with the U.S. Justice, particularly concerning the cartel's dealings with the Drug Enforcement Administration, mean that the pair will not spend the rest of their lives in jail. And we know that is the biggest fear of narco traffickers. The biggest thing that happened to these cats was when their countries, be it Colombia or Mexico or wherever these guys are hanging out, when they decided to start extraditing cats to America for these long-ass sentences in places like Flomax, it was a wrap, right? That's when shit got real. Before all of that happened, these guys were confident that they'd be able to move with a bit of impunity on their home turf. But things started to change a little bit. And there was one specific turning point. We're going to get to it. Zambada betrayed his own father in 2019, revealing everything he knew about the cartel at Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's trial in New York, even after being groomed to serve in it since birth. Now, we know that Vicente Zambada's testimony was a big problem for El Chapo. It was a huge problem, and one of the biggest weights that sent him up the road. And now this is El Mayo's son. El Mayo is the man at Sinaloa, like they're saying in the article. He is a big-time power player and one of the only OG narco traffickers to never get hemmed up, to never get caught by the American government. His son, obviously, on the other hand, over here singing like he's Joe Valachi. I don't know how that's going to work out for old boy.
For the ones who get going when the going gets tough, and the ones who know we're tougher together. For the Pathfinders breaking new ground, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as fast access to experts and 24/7 customer support. Because we know you have people depending on you, so you can always depend on us. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hopefully he's on the Henry Hill plan, right? Because I highly doubt my man's ever trying to go back to Mexico. The thought of being dumped in a barrel of acid is probably not the most appealing thought my dude has ever had. Vicente had been extradited in 2010 and cooperated with the authorities since then. Although the latter have not confirmed a date, he either has been already released or will soon be at some point this year. Although Eduardo Arlano Felix played a smaller role in the Tijuana Cartel, he acted as an informant, and his sentence is due to expire in August. And, it's funny to see that even these narco traffickers, these high-level, high-placed narco traffickers, are not immune from this stool pigeon game, right? Look, nobody wants these kind of sentences. Nobody wants to stare at a federal RICO case, folks. That is the biggest tool in the toolbox for the federal government, is them smacking you with a RICO case. And all of these so-called gangsters, these hard dudes, they ain't about it. When the chips are down and they get in that room, just like the mafia, these guys aren't doing these sentences. And that's why when you get in the drug game, it becomes a whole new monster. Because it doesn't matter how close you are to somebody. It doesn't matter how friendly you are with them. With the crazy sentences you get in a drug case, you better believe you're going to sing. And we see it here. Some of the biggest names, right? Royalty in the cartel life. Turn and snitch. And, I'm very critical of the American justice system. If you listen to the Jeffrey Epstein podcast, you know that. I hammer it on a regular basis. But I will say this. These cats fear nothing more than extradition and sitting in an American jail cell where they're going to be treated like everybody else. That's what they're scared of the most. Not death, nothing like that, but extradition. The release of these two big-name drug traffickers will revive the bloody battle of the 1990s in Mexican collective memory. Well, that might be the case. These folks aren't moving the way they used to, right? So this isn't going to, per se, ignite a brand new rivalry in Sinaloa and Tijuana. That's not what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at here is kind of just an introduction for you folks, right? To maybe get an idea of some of the players that are on the stage. And, obviously, it's very important to recognize with these guys getting out, well, you never know. This was a war that went beyond money, territory, and border control into more ancient concepts of honor and blood feuds. The main proponent of this brutal score settling was Vicente's father, El Mayo Zambada, the undisputed head of the Sinaloa Cartel, and still, to this day, is the head of the Sinaloa Cartel. The legacy media will tell you it was El Chapo, but he was a co-boss, no doubt about it, but it was really El Mayo who has been running this shit from the jump. Now, since El Chapo has been put away, his sons have their own faction in the Sinaloa Cartel called El Chapitos. And they are vying for power with El Mayo right now as we speak. El Mayo is the only boss of his generation never to have been arrested despite trafficking drugs for more than half a century. He planned and executed the bloody war against the Arlano Felix family, and he definitely did. Look, again, that war was vicious. It was brutal. I'm sure you folks remember the images on TV when Juarez was, considered the most dangerous place in the world, and we'd get a quick blurb in the American media about it. Nothing too deep. We didn't even know the players' names for the most part, right? But it was happening a stone's throw from the border. In fact, right across the border from Juarez at the time was El Paso. And that was one of the most, safest cities in America. But right across the border, you have all of this going on. The criminal empire controlled in the 1980s by the Sinaloa Cartel, then known as the Juarez Cartel, included a series of territorial pacts that the war against the Arellano Felixes would blow up years later. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, Don Nito, and Rafael Caro Quintero established business links with Pablo Escobar's powerful organization in Colombia, and there was also tacit agreements with other cartels on Mexico's northern border for drug trafficking. And look, there was a whole entire network. The Gulf Cartel, led by Miguel, they weren't messing around. He was branching out. He was taking packages for the Cali Cartel. He was taking packages for Pablo and the Medellin Cartel, because up until this point, most of the cocaine was coming in America through Miami, through Florida. It would go through the Bahamas, into Florida, and then make its way through America. Well, what the Gulf Cartel did, and Miguel, they changed the whole entire playing field. And they started taking those packages through North America, southern border, and, well, from there, anyone familiar with the United States understands our interstate system, the freeways and whatnot, and how everything is connected. You can get anywhere. And there you have it. That was the pivotal moment for the real wave of cocaine, for the real power moves to be made by the cartel. The turning point came with the brutal murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena in 1985, as the agency laser-focused on the Mexican narco-traffickers to avenge their own. And this is what I was talking about just a little earlier when I said we'd get to that. Now, Kiki Camarena was a DEA agent who was working these narco-traffickers. Well, he caused them a bunch of grief. A whole lot of grief. And not just them, but, according to a lot of real strong sources, people really high up in the Mexican government. With that said, they thought it would be a great idea to kidnap Kiki Camarena, torture him, and try and get information out of him. Well, it didn't really play out the way they thought. They basically yanked the tiger by the tail at this point, because the United States government was not going to sit back and let a DEA agent be murdered by some drug traffickers. So things accelerated. Don Nito was arrested in 1985. Felix Gallardo was captured in 1989 and is still serving a sentence in Mexico. And Caro Quintero, accused of direct involvement in the kidnapping, torture, and execution of Agent Camarena, was arrested in 1985 in Costa Rica. So, Caro Quintero is one of the main players in the Kiki Camarena situation. We're going to talk about that in more depth. No doubt about it. That's going to be part of this series. Remember, this is just to wet your beak a little bit, right? But Caro Quintero was one of the main players in all of that. And also, by the way, if you like to puff a little cheeb out there, you smoke a little bit of, that good seedless weed. Well, these guys, they might not have created seedless marijuana, but they certainly made it so it came to market. These guys were producing seedless marijuana in the 1,000 pounds and pounds and pounds mode. And that is what led to Kiki Camarena being abducted and eventually killed by these guys, because he found their grow spot, caused them all kinds of grief, caused them all kinds of money. And these guys were acting with impunity, right? Caro Quintero, they weren't used to anyone stepping on their toes. They weren't used to anybody chin-checking them. And then it was on. From that day on, it was all-out war for the DEA to try and bring down the Gulf Cartel. But what they really did is make things much worse, like all the time when they get involved with anything, just like the CIA. They went after the cartel, they splintered it, and it became a chimera. Many different heads. Quintero was released after a controversial ruling by Mexican courts and is currently unaccounted for. But the DEA is still after him. A year ago, it put a bounty on his head of $20 million. Its highest ever reward for a criminal's capture. So if you think the United States government has forgotten about Kiki Camarena and what went down, and good old Rafa here, you're wrong. And Rafa knows it. Recently, within the last couple of weeks, by the way, I read an article that one of Rafa's farms in Mexico, I want to say Guadalajara, might be wrong though, was burned to the ground by rivals. So while Caro might not be a huge player in this anymore, he's still in the game. With the heads of the organization arrested by the end of the 1980s, its singular control began to waver. El Mayo, one of the oldest associates of the Guadalajara cartel, allied with El Chapo to control key trafficking routes, and engaged in a battle whose legacy has been revived with the release of Vicente and one of his eternal rivals, Eduardo Felix Arellano. And not to get too deep off the subject, but there are a lot of new players on the ground now, right? There are a lot of new players. I don't want to get it too confused with adding new names to this article right here, but as you'll see, as we talk a little bit more about this in future episodes, you're going to see that there are a lot of new players on the stage. Vicente's father, El Mayo, lived in the border city of Tijuana in the early 1990s, with the aim of preventing the bloodthirsty Arellano Felix brothers, led by Benjamin and Ramon, 2 of the 7 children, from taking power over his key strip of land. And this is like on an extreme level to what you would see on the street corners in America, right? You have people in America, drug dealers in America, that'll battle over corners. These dudes battle over whole cities, folks. Whole counties, whole states. It's on a whole different level down in Mexico. The Arellano Felix brothers responded by trying to murder Vicente, initially in 1991 when he was just 16 years old, according to Anabel Hernandez, author of a book about him entitled El Traidor, or The Traitor. The conflict intensified with El Chapo's misdeeds, aimed at maintaining their stronghold, leading to bloody attacks with a level of violence never before seen in Mexico. Now, this all kicked off and really has went downhill since. Now it's commonplace for these guys, cartel members, to torture their rivals and film it and put it on social media. It's a very common practice. It's gruesome, it's bloody, and I do not suggest anyone search out those videos. They are disturbing. And these guys would get clout like that, right? The cartels are super active on social media, and they're always flaunting their power. They're always flaunting their wealth. And these guys have no remorse or no regard for anything. These are straight up killers, savages. The war between the Sinaloa and Tijuana cartels may have set the stage for later wars between the Beltran-Leyva and Zetas crime syndicates. But it was the first great narco conflict. So we're going to get to the Beltran-Leyva and Zeta crime conflict as well. The Zetas were the most brutal of all of these cats. These were ex-military guys, special force guys, who showed up on the scene and were clinical in the way they took out rivals. And not only were they clinical, they were brutal. Again, videos, torture, all sorts of things that I'll leave up to your own imagination. I don't need to get into here, but man, talk about a scary-ass group of individuals, and that group is certainly the Zetas. In Baja California, local newspapers said there were only two types of dead, Sinaloans and Arlanos. The city became a macabre graveyard, with dismembered people hanging from bridges. It also became one of the world's most dangerous places to live. The battle intensified further when El Chapo and his lieutenant, El Güero Palma, tried to kill Ramon Arellano Felix at a nightclub called Christine in Puerto Vallarta, but botched the hit and killed 6 others instead. El Güero is now also awaiting release at age 61 after spending 26 years in prison. Now, El Güero has had a rough life, to say the least. Okay? This guy, brutal man, no doubt about it. But some of the things that he has been through are mind-numbingly brutal. The violence spilled over even further into the lives of the cartel families. The Arellano Felix brothers ordered a hitman to seduce El Güero's wife, which he succeeded in doing, meanwhile infiltrating the cartel. The hitman killed her and sent her head to El Güero in a refrigerated box. Then, El Güero's children, who were 4 and 5 years old, were thrown off a 150-meter-high bridge in Venezuela. He received a videotape of their deaths. So as you can see, not the easiest life for our pal here, huh? Now, again, these are brutal people. And when you sign up for this life, and you choose this life, there's a certain set of things that come along with it. This is one of them. But when families are involved, it's very foreign to me. I'm very Americanized in that, right? And Cosa Nostra type of thinking, meaning families are out of it. You don't touch nobody's family. Never mind seduce somebody's wife, cut off her head, send it to old boy in a refrigerated box, and then throw dude's children off of a bridge, videotaping the whole ordeal. Yeah, that's not going to work out in America with La Cosa Nostra. That's just not how it goes here. And again, it's a whole different scene down in Mexico, folks, a different set of rules. And these cats have no problem wiping out whole families. The peak of this confrontation came with the death of Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas in the parking lot of Guadalajara Airport in 1993, caught in the crossfire between members of the Arellano gang and those working for El Chapo. The Mexican government blamed the clergyman's death on El Chapo himself, catapulting him to global fame. He had until that point only been known for his vicious attacks on the Tijuana Cartel, and was arrested that year in Guatemala, although he escaped from prison for the first time in 2001. So also, which is pretty scary to think about, the cartels were using gang members from San Diego to get involved with a lot of these hits. I don't want to spoil too much of that because, as you can probably imagine by now, I have an article I want to go through and talk about this exact subject. But there were gang members from San Diego who were pulling off licks in Tijuana, dumping on people, pulling people's cards, and then scooting back to America to have beers and burgers with their boys. We're going to get into that as well, but it was a tactic used by a lot of these cartels. The early 2000s also marked the decline of the Arlano Felix family. In 2002, Ramon was gunned down at a carnival in Mazatlan, in Sinaloa State. A week later, his brother Benjamin was arrested and went on to be sentenced in the United States to 25 years for drug trafficking. Again, their biggest fear. These dudes would rather run down the street with, no clothes on, with one handgun while everybody else has machine guns aimed at them, than come to America. And that's not me overblowing it. That's truly how they feel. These guys don't want it. They don't want that smoke. The youngest brother, Francisco Javier, also known as El Tigrillo, was left as leader of the cartel, but he was arrested in 2006 by the U.S. Coast Guard while fishing on a yacht 25 kilometers off the coast of Baja California. He was given a 23-and-a-half-year sentence in the United States. Get comfortable, my dude, you ain't going anywhere. Imagine you're out there as some drug lord and you think that you got everything on lock. You're out there fishing on your big-ass yacht, probably got a bunch of hot girls, bumping some music, probably, tasting your own product. And the Coast Guard rolls up on you and arrests you, not the DEA, not the CIA. You got busted by the Coast Guard? Damn, bro, that's rough. If he is released in August, Eduardo Arlano Felix, alias El Doctor, is the heir presumptive of the criminal organization on the verge of extinction. Along with his sister, Enadina, and his son, he had continued the business when the rest of the brothers were killed or jailed. Look, it's in there. Down in Mexico especially, it's in their blood. This is a family business, right? These guys pass it down. And the feuds, the blood feuds, they're hard to explain and understand if you don't have a grip of what's going on. These blood feuds are vicious down there. Like Hatfield McCoy's type shit. Hernandez, the journalist, said he would not count on El Mayo forgetting about him. El Mayo's hatred for the Arlano brothers is infinite. That does not mean that with Eduardo's release, a war will begin, as the Arlanos barely exist and no longer have the capacity to confront the powerful Sinaloa cartel. But a man like Ismael Zambada, it is a matter of honor that there will be a reckoning, she said. And, those are scary-ass words, right? If I was El Doctor, I don't know if I'd be coming back to Mexico, or I'd be on the first flight to America, to Idaho or something. Probably not the right guy to have mad at you, right, El Mayo? Probably not the right guy to have coming after you. Another one of the brothers, Rafael Arlano, who was freed in 2008 after his capture in 1993 and extradition to the United States, was shot and killed by a hitman dressed as a clown in 2013 in Los Cabos, Baja California. The Arlanos were already by then just a specter of Mexican drug trafficking's bloody past. But it didn't matter when he went out in public. You can't shake it, right? You're in that life. Your ops are going to be looking for you. You're red dotted, green lit. And somebody in this life who's looking to make their bones, make a name for themselves, get a come up, well, they're going to look to push your button. And if you're out here lacking, if you get caught hesitating, if you get caught in a position where you're not defending yourself, this is the result. This life should not be glorified. This is not the way anyone should want to live. And anybody who is moving in this life, well, your life expectancy is not very long. As another member of the Tijuana clan stands to be released in August, the long reach of the cruel war of the 1990s could yet be felt. And I have to say, folks, as brutal as that was, as bloody as the war was in the 90s and the early 2000s, what's going on today is absolutely terrifying. Some of the new players on the scene taking it up a notch, doing it bigger, more disturbing videos, huge numbers of people missing, and no answers for the people of Mexico. And for me, and my perspective, and how I look at all of this, it's not just a Mexican problem. That's the easy way. That's the coward's way out. This is a problem that can only be solved on our side of the border, the American side of the border. And from where I'm sitting, and my opinion on this whole matter, drugs, the legalization of it all, we need to decriminalize drugs if we want this sort of thing to end. If we want the bloodshed to end, if we want the misery to end, if we want the broken homes in America to end, not all of them obviously, but a good portion of them, and if we want all of this misery that comes along with this to end, then we have to change the way we think about it. We have to change how we fix this. Because this isn't a war, folks, all right? There's no war here. This is the prison complex filling itself up and getting rich on the blood, pain, and suffering of the citizens of Mexico and the citizens of the United States. And until we address this problem and we have honest conversations about it, you're going to keep seeing people dropping dead in the streets in Mexico due to drug violence. And here in America, oh, what, you thought we were immune? You're going to see people continue to drop dead in the streets from drug violence, as far as, homicides. But what you're really going to see is more people dying from preventable overdoses. All because we refuse to change the way we go about things. And I don't know about you folks, but me, I'm pretty tired of it. I'm tired of all the suffering. I'm tired of all the violence that goes with the drug trade. And I'm certainly tired of friends and loved ones dropping dead from overdoses. So hopefully, moving forward, as people get a better idea of what is really going on, as people start to understand that this is, again, a very nuanced issue and just a simple border wall isn't going to fix it. Once we get to a point where people start to get that there is a lot more here and that we need to have an honest conversation about it, then I believe we'll start to have some progress. But with prohibition, I think the blueprint has already been laid. I think that we have the past to go by. And if looking at prohibition in America and the misery it caused is any idea of what, the future might hold, I don't know how we continued on with prohibition all over again. But this time, it didn't enrich, the mafiosos. Not in America. Well, it did, but not to the extent that it did down in Mexico. And it wasn't done for no reason, right? These guys had an idea of what they were doing. The people who were bringing these drugs into America, they had a plan. They had a plot. And in the next episode, tomorrow, we're going to talk about who was involved in bringing these drugs over. Who was making moves? Where were the planes coming from? Who was providing all of the logistical networking? We're going to dig into all of that on tomorrow's episode as we lead up to Saturday and episode number 1 in the series on the failed war on drugs. Thank you all very much for joining me for this first episode of Life is a Mosh Pit. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, you can expect another episode tomorrow, same time, every single day. We'll have at least this one episode. Now, there's going to be other things as other stories pop up. Obviously, we're not just focused on the war on drugs here. This is just our kickoff. So we're going to have, other things in the mix as well. Tomorrow, we're going to pick up on this story, however, and we're going to talk a little bit about the gun runners and the drug movement. How the drugs were brought to America, who were bringing them in, and all of that stuff. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great night.
Hey, what's up? This is Matt Barnes, and I'm here to talk to you about weed. As an NBA champ and analyst, I guess you can say I'm an expert in that space. And Ease is the cannabis version of me, and they have you covered with the best delivery service in the game. And if you're still wondering why I want to roll up with these pros, with one click, I can order minority-owned brands from Ease's social equity menu. So what are you waiting for? You miss 100% of the weed, you don't order. Ease, a highly calculated cannabis delivery service. Get up to 30% off your first order with promo code MATT. That's MATT at ease.com. Hey, what's up? This is Matt Barnes, and I'm here to talk to you about weed. As an NBA champ and analyst, I guess you can say I'm an expert in that space. And Ease is the cannabis version of me, and they have you covered with the best delivery service in the game. Seeing the in-laws for dinner? That's a low-dose sativa gummy. Can't stand another Zoom meeting? They're sending in some top-shelf THC beverages. So what are you waiting for? Get up to 30% off your first order with promo code MATT. That's MATT at ease.com. Ease, a highly calculated cannabis delivery service.